All right, we've got people connecting in. Everybody should be here, and we're here for the closing session. So one of the fun things about xAPI Party, I mentioned it this morning, if you've been with us all day or all afternoon or whatever time it is, wherever you happen to be, for our folks from Australia, it is gosh darn early in the morning. If you've been to one of the xAPI parties that were live at TorranceLearning, you might have noticed that we have a tradition where we have the drinking of the statements. So we commissioned a cocktail, like a custom cocktail to be made. We decided xAPI was ready to have an official cocktail. Our recipe is here, but I wanted to so you could go ahead, make these, do this on your own this evening. The statement goes like this, and it looks like this, or really anything you want it to look like at the end of the day. So the first part of the statement is the core of the statement. We serve them in test tubes. You may have noticed that Peter Gunther and Matt Cleaver's slide presentation had a test tube theme at the beginning. Your test tube is your core of an xAPI statement. It's got three parts, just like an actor, a verb, and an object. It has ginger, simple syrup, and lime, right? That's all you need. Very, very simple drink, very, very simple statement. Gets the job done. Not terribly interesting. However, just like the xAPI cohort, the simple, right, the basic statement is actually accessible to everyone. So even non-drinkers can enjoy with that. So I'll pour that in. Oh, this is my learning record provider. So your glassware, right, whatever conveys your beverage, right, sends your statement, is your learning record provider. So we have lots and lots of different options for learning record providers to make this all work very nicely and not make a gigantic mess. And then we have the interesting part, right? Context, groupings, parents, all sorts of fun information you can choose. I am choosing for this evening a clear beverage. But you can choose all sorts of different options here for your own context. And there's also, I'm going to add a little bit of bubbly beverage here. You can decorate it with all sorts of additional extensions and loads of fun stuff to have a really, really interesting and fancy frou-frou drink. And then you go ahead and send it to your LRS. So bottoms up. I promise if I see any of you out at a learning conference, I would be more than happy to buy you a statement and consume them with you. And you can always have a Bud Light if SCORM is still your thing. So I am going to attempt to stop sharing, bring us back now to our panel, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. If you do go ahead and make yourself a statement, do me a favor, take a picture of it, post it, tag it xAPI Party. We will be happy to celebrate with you. So looks like we have all sorts of people back, joined in from the second room. Let's start a panel. So what I love about, and we're still waiting for Andy Johnson. So when I looked at kind of who is our speakers and what were the different things we're talking about and who's got lots of experience and interest in the spec and where things are going. And then I realized a pattern. Human beings love patterns. And I had the ability to get an Andrew and an Andy on a panel together and two Torrances, which like almost never happens. There's actually another Torrance in L&D whom I know, but she's not into xAPI. So Kristin, you're it. And then Judy. I don't know. I thought it would be fun and random. So, and you're kind of fun and random. So there was a little bit more intention in there, right? So
there is another Judy Katz in the L&D space, like on the speaker circuit sometimes, but I never see her speaking about like technology stuff. So again, we can file that with not into xAPI, I suppose, not a Not a criticism. I don't know her.
I will say, oh, and here's Andy. Awesome. I will say, though, right, from a not on the speaker circuit, not into xAPI, what I loved about Rebecca Davenport's presentation was, right, she went from 0, right, showing up at my Hey, Andy, we do see you. Fantastic. Right, showing up at an intro to xAPI presentation at DevLearn in 2018 to Brandon Hall Gold Award winner in 2021, right? That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So let's get started. What I'd love, because you all spoke in different tracks today, so not everybody got a chance to see you. Let's kind of go round robin, and there's no Robins on our panel. Anyways, we'll go around and introduce yourself, but also what's your connection to xAPI?
I'm going to jump in. I don't know what the order is, but I'll go first. So I'm Andrew, and I got involved in xAPI way back in the day. So I was responsible for making Captivate e-learning courses work with Blackboard, and this was before Blackboard implemented the Rusty software SCORM engine. So it was a challenge and it wasn't fun. And then this new thing called xAPI was advertised, and so I got involved in that. And then joined the group with Andy and others, sort of editing and developing the xAPI specification to the version 1.0.3, which is currently still the current version.
All right, we're going to get to that, but anyways. All right, who's next? Introductions.
Go, Andy. Alphabetical.
All right, I'm Andy Johnson. I've kind of been involved with this since the beginning. I didn't evaluate the original Rusty project, Project Tin Can, but I've been involved with leading the xAPI effort since probably 0.9 came out. It was funny because I was doing the leadership, but we also had an outreach guy. Originally, it was Aaron Silvers, and then after that we got Craig Wiggins, and Craig and I had the idea to actually start the xAPI cohorts. So that was the first one, and then I think we ran it for 2 seasons, and then we were told don't do that anymore. It's not I don't know if it wasn't worth it, but like it's not what we do like at ADL. So we stopped, and thank goodness that Megan took it back over and has run it for so many seasons. But still riding the xAPI wave and just enjoying all of it.
Fantastic. There were 3, because that's how I met you when I came in for the boot camp after the 3rd one.
Okay, we managed to make it 3 years.
So I'm Judy Katz. I've been an instructional designer for about 20 years, but really started getting involved in community around 10 years ago, going to conferences, writing and stuff like that. And that's when I fell in with the xAPI crowd. Andy, you mentioned Aaron and others. And so I kind of was keeping up with it from the beginning, first as an instructional designer for many years. And now I work at EduWorks, and I'm the product manager for PeBL Pro, which is an authoring tool that was born out of an ADL project to create an open source spec and code base to essentially have highly interactive, personalized xAPI enabled ebooks. And so now I'm have participated in the cohort many times, and this semester did work on profiles, including starting a profile for PeBL Pro. So that's my everything. So Kristin.
Hi, everyone. I am Kristin Torrance. I'm a learning experience designer for an XR company called Talespin. And I guess my relationship to xAPI, I am fairly new to xAPI, but I am exploring how we can use xAPI in both game-based learning and immersive learning to track learner behavior and learner competencies.
Very cool. Very cool. And if you didn't get a chance to catch her session, or actually any of these sessions that this crew attended, our recordings are going to come out next week or so. They're pretty quick. If you love AirMeet, we're happy to talk to you about that too, because we enjoyed that platform today. Okay. There were a ton of really interesting case studies today, and each of you mentioned some practical use of xAPI in your sessions. I'm going to challenge you, and it doesn't have to be your favorite because I know picking favorites is really hard, right? But what's one xAPI project out in the world, doesn't have to be one of your own, that catches your eye or captures or that you feel like other people ought to know about? It's just really cool that didn't get talked about today, which is really hard for Andrew, who presented 21 or more different ones today. Sorry, buddy.
I do have one more though. I do have one more. So number 22 is surveys, which I probably should have put in the presentation, but I forgot about it. There's a survey tool, used to be called Survey Gizmo, it's now called Alchema, and they implemented xAPI tracking a while ago, and they've had it for a while. And so we've been using that for annual surveys. We do a little measuring the business impact. You might come across the survey. And it actually works really well for survey data. I mean, I know it's not like a learning thing, but it's questions that people are answering. And so it's just a really nice way of getting that survey data into Watershed for analytics.
I am kind of scratching my head to come up with an example, but something that I guess I'm breaking the rules because we did talk a little bit about this. We kind of got off topic and talked a little bit about this today, but I am increasingly interested in the use of xAPI data for formative evaluation and user experience types of evaluation, which, oh gosh, I guess I do know one. Megan, you told me about one. And we did a little video interview about it a while back. But I really love being able to use xAPI to see how people are using your learning experience, and what comes out of that. Like one of the earliest examples from probably, again, very early days, but Sean Putnam had one where he was at his company. They were investing a lot in making these really extensive software simulation videos. And he was able to use xAPI early on to show that people were not watching those videos. And it saved the instructional design team a ton of time. So that's kind of a classic example, but I know that that there are people who are starting to use it for more complex things now, just in terms of being able to not see only what our learners have achieved, but how are they using our products? How are we doing? What are we achieving with what we're putting out there?
I'm just going to jump in. I love those examples where it's like proving learning isn't working, because sometimes I think it's all about proving that learning works. But sometimes you want to prove it's not working, and get rid of it so you can focus on the stuff that does.
I loved asking, as an instructional designer, what's the least that I can do for you? Because we tend to over-engineer a lot of solutions, and sometimes we can use some of this data to figure out what really works, what are the parts that really work, and what doesn't.
So I'll fire one out. I'm really interested in using xAPI to improve UI and UX. I think of both the physical engineering and the virtual space and how people interact with them, and recognizing that we can really probably use xAPI to optimize performance in those environments, perhaps even recreating certain things that might be created for humans and making it ergonomically better, or any sort of playing with the body that we can, because with AR and VR, we can start to analyze motion more, and if we can use xAPI to capture that motion and understand how we move and how we interact with those user interfaces, whether they be physical or virtual, I think is really interesting.
I'll jump in. I think how I'd like to use API, or how I'd like to see API being used, is really about how to track different personas that use all of our different learning solutions, and really seeing what that learning journey looks like for each specific persona of all the variety of personas that use our solutions. I think is could really help for sort of personalization and adaptivity, and really just getting a really great idea of what's working in sequence or as an array of things for certain roles and within the company.
I know there's a guy, Andrew Corbett at UC Davis, who was using xAPI data in a nursing course. And they basically segmented, they use some statistical analyses to segment their learners and see that, well, on average, everybody's doing okay, but when you segmented learners, you had a group who was doing just fine and a group who was not doing just fine, and average was not okay. So that was kind of cool. You know, Andrew, a point you made about Alchemer, which is a tool that we use at TorranceLearning, actually simply because it does xAPI, right? So that's kind of like my table stakes, is it's got to use xAPI. But I remember the day, several years ago, right? They've had this for several years, maybe like 4 or more years. And I was on a call with a client and we're working with their LMS. It was an LMS that had an integrated LRS with it. And the client says, yeah, can I send my survey gizmo data as xAPI to your LMS? And I'm like, all right, everybody, I'll take this question. Right? And I'm like, okay, so yes, technically you can. You can download it as in CSV and you can use a transmogrifier to load it into the LRS. Like, yes, we can do this. And in the time it took me to go through that, they sent me the link with Survey Gizmo, now Alchemer's xAPI integration page. I'm like, well, dang it. Like, yes, you can absolutely do this. like, why would you do anything else? Of course, now you can do this, right? So, and there's some challenges with it. But that was a great example. Same thing with Kaltura, right? When we talk to the folks at Kaltura, it's like, why did you choose to implement xAPI? And the answer is, well, it's just another data stream. Yes, right. This should be. So let's talk about adoption. Okay. I've been doing this for a long. Judy's been doing this for a long time. Kristin's relatively new to, but Andrew, you've been doing this for a really long time. Let's talk about the state of adoption. How do we feel about the timeline? Is this about right? Should we be expecting this? Or that's okay. Should we be expecting this? Is this just about right? Or are we all really frustrated with how slow this is?
I want to go first. Coming, from more of an outsider's perspective than some here, for sure. I think that there are a lot of ways that adoption has been really slow. And I know that when we were having some conversations about PeBL Pro, we were, my company and like where the project had come from, it was very immersed in the xAPI space. And we had to add on SCORM so that we had something that had any chance of being adopted in the corporate space. Because the perspective was, oh, well, everybody uses xAPI because they're coming from, a government perspective. And I'm like, no, actually, xAPI adoption in the corporate space, according to the Guild, is about 17% right now, or 20, maybe we've bumped up a couple of percent. But I think that we saw something in the last week that is almost sure to improve adoption quite a lot. And that is the ability to create xAPI statements from triggers in Storyline. Storyline is a huge player in the corporate space. And so I think that we will see a huge influx of adoption because of that, and probably very quickly. And if I had a crystal ball, I would say that those of us in more of like the standards world are going to probably be dealing with some fallout from that as well. But I don't want to cause too much of a fight here. See, one of the things that as I became involved with an actual product instead of just being an instructional designer, I lost a little bit of my ability to talk about other authoring tools. So, and that was kind of one of my favorite parts of the job. So it was unfortunate, but I would love for other people to weigh in on that as well. And I'm sorry about the.
Yeah, Judy, I think Judy nailed it on the head with the tool vendors and getting them on board. And it seems to be that once you get that critical mass of tool vendors really adopting, then people who were on the fringe can now get involved. And I think that's one of the things of xAPI is with that and CMI5. If we can just get people in the door and thinking about what they can do, then they'll start to be more creative. And I think people lived in the SCORM world for so long, and I think when they got out, they just wanted to go back in the hole, and it was all they knew, right? If we asked somebody, well, what do you want to track now that you can track anything? They looked at you and said, like, pass, fail, completion, because they just didn't know any better. So I think as we enable that world and they get more comfortable with it and they see these cool use cases, the light bulb starts to turn on, and we can embrace that creativity again. And tool vendors can help enable that.
It made me laugh, Megan, when you mentioned Alchema and then Kaltura, because I know both of those tools, a key element in them adopting xAPI was a particular passionate person that I know that was hassling those vendors about that. And I think that makes a difference, particularly in organizations that big clients of these vendors. If you put your foot down, it makes a difference with vendors. For me, though, I try not to think too much about xAPI adoption, because xAPI is the plumbing, the technology behind that makes it all work. And I feel like if we can change the industry's way of thinking to be data-driven, to want to have evidence, to want to make sure learning actually works, not just happens, then the xAPI adoption follows. And it's not so much. I think that the technology is it works. You can build a whole ecosystem that's xAPI conformant. If you can build an ecosystem with tools that do support xAPI. It's all there. It's more about that mindset shift of making sure that learning works, making sure it is having an impact. Or doesn't work, yes.
Or doesn't work. Well, I mean, you think about, we don't talk about SCORM. We don't have SCORM parties anymore. Like, because that's what's out there, right? Soon this will, well, I'm not sure, maybe people did have SCORM or didn't have SCORM. Andy, did people have SCORM parties when SCORM was released?
We had the plug fests, but that was probably the closest thing.
Okay.
Definitely not a party vibe.
No custom cocktails created for SCORM. No.
I think Torrance brings the party vibe. Let's be real about this. There didn't have to be an xAPI party until you did it. So,
but now there has to be an xAPI party. So, but I think I think that there's a lot to this, right? We're talking about geek-free tools, right? Which I feel has been really, really important. But we've also been talking about the expectations of stakeholders, right? So Andy, to your point, right? You can measure anything. What do you want to measure? How many people completed it, right? And that's table stakes, right? I think whose session were we in which we talked about, kind of your basic data, the eye candy level data. Or the gateway data. There we go. Your compliance training was your gateway data. Actually, compliance was the gateway to SCORM, right? Compliance was that was why you needed a learning management system and you needed SCORM. What kinds of things do we see from buying organizations, from software providing organizations, from client kind of service and software buying organizations? What kinds of things do we see that we need that either help or hinder adoption of the spec?
Well, let's hope that profiles help. There's been so much good work done on profiles in the cohort this semester, and I'm just seeing more and more and more about it all the time. Andy, you had a great tutorial with Mike and Art last week at ITSEC, and I think that was the second year that y'all have done that, and it explains so much about why they're needed and how they help all of the users, with the users being the humans and the software in all of the different spaces, make sense of all of that data. So I think, I would certainly hope that will be something that will promote more adoption by making it all easier to use, because you can always make something geekier, especially when we're talking about something that is essentially software. But I think that the things that drive adoption are going to be the things that make it less geeky, the things that make it geek free, the things that let the software talk to the software and exchange data, and let the humans, worry about the insights and the learning experiences and the things like that.
I'm not sure if it'll help or hinder, but I think one thing that would at least be interesting would be, as the market evolves for this, when we start having graphical experts, such that it's not so much that the visualizations are tied to the LRS that's providing them, but that somebody really steps up and can produce killer visualizations from xAPI data. And I think as we start to see that decoupling of all the different services, I think we'll start to see value in the different components of xAPI and how it can be fragmented, and people can see that there's a lot of value out there for products to diversify and demonstrate expertise and really give us the best of every world.
I feel like data viz and data science experts are so expensive and so in demand right now that the L&D departments just don't have a lot of ability to attract them, which I know or maybe you disagree with, I don't know. But it's a real challenge. And I agree with you on the data visualization. Ultimately, people love and pay for pretty pictures.
Yeah, and the analytics side of it too, Judy. As you said, analytics is the other half of that. If we can get some really smart analytics that run on basic data, it would be amazing.
I saw a really interesting survey infographic thing the other day where they'd looked at different organizations, and they were looking at the availability of data at different levels in the organization. And the results were showing that actually at the top of the organization, senior leaders, that they've actually often got access to the data and they've got things that they can use. But more at the front line, people don't tend to have access to the data. I think that's probably true in L&D as well, that the people creating the content may not have the same access to data as people higher up the organization, or the data that's relevant for those people, and even individual line managers, people lower down the chain. It's harder for them to get the data that they need to be data driven. That's the problem we're trying to solve at Watershed, to give people that access. But get that little plug in there. But yeah, I think it's important for everyone to have access to the data, not just people at the top of the organization.
Well, and I think what was really interesting in Kristin's presentation, right, was they weren't pretty visualizations. They were very clear visualizations. And that's not a slam on Kristin's presentation. It was exactly what the statistical package exports and exactly what you need to be able to follow those competency chain. I thought that was pretty powerful. So yes, pretty, but let's talk about actually making smart decisions with data.
Yeah, and I think, a part of that too is really the storytelling of the data, right? Like being able to disseminate it in a way that is impactful and makes sense to people, I think is, a very key skill that, I'm still trying to build that skill. I'm sure, lots of folks in our industry are, and it starts with getting that access to that data and, having these research questions about our learners and about our products and about our solutions, and analyzing them in any way that we can to then make these data informed decisions moving forward.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I think that's, and we right, we're instructional designers. We get this, or learning experience designers, right? We can help educate as we're sharing out that data, right? Right. So Frank has a question. Let's show this on screen here. Let's talk about, right, demonstrating a competency, like being able to cook spaghetti or something that's important. I think actually, Frank, cooking spaghetti is very important. But how do we talk about tracking some of these activities, right? And being able to make good use of that as it rolls up to some sort of competency model.
So there are some things happening the ones that I'm familiar with are a little bit more in the DoD space. And I think that, again, like we were talking about in another session, when it comes to actual performance, we get it when it comes to sports, music, and things that can kill you. I'm going to credit Julie Dirksen, as I always have to there. And of course, the whole DoD space is rather centered around that last one. And so there are things happening along the lines of service members firing weapons and at targets, and the targets being able to detect whether they hit where they were supposed to, from what angle did they hit, and all of this using xAPI data and being able to real time give feedback to the actor, because based on the place that it hit, the angle that it hit, et cetera, they'll be able to tell them, oh, you need to stand differently, or you need to, do this or that differently. And I thought that was a really exciting use case in terms of just being able to evaluate and prompt learner actor adaptation in the moment. And, you see, I've seen some other examples from things like forklifts. So again, working in an OSHA regulated space definitely could be classified as something that could kill you, and people, forklifts being able to send xAPI data about how safe somebody is being, or whether they're following particular OSHA guidelines or following the standards that they may have learned in training. Sorry, Andrew, to use a US centered thing there, but everybody, your country has their own. So there are some exciting things happening, but I also think that, so Kristin and I were just talking after her session, which was fantastic. And just right now, somebody spoke up and said, she was talking about being able to evaluate skills in the context of playing games based on your xAPI data, which was a fantastic presentation. And somebody hopped in and said, I just can't see a use case for this in corporate training. And I was sitting there saying, wow, did they ever tell on corporate training? That's just burn all across the screen. So sometimes sometimes you're in environments where performance really is measured, and it might be measured outside of a digital space. And sometimes you're not.
In terms of, just to add on to that, and how you capture that data, particularly in the medical space, we've got a few clients using xAPI, which is an app. It used to be called xAPI apps. It's an application with all kinds of different pieces to it, but the checklist application is a really good way of capturing sort of real world, what's happening in the real world. You actually have a person watch what's happening, record when people make mistakes, perhaps record when people do certain steps that they're supposed to take, rate them on those steps, those kind of things. So you can capture data about what's happening in the real world, and sometimes that data is already captured. So if you think in the sort of quick restaurant industry, McDonald's, KFC, all those sorts of places, they have things, mystery shoppers that will go in and observe things. They're already capturing that data about what's happening in the real world, and whether people are applying their learning, whether people are at that level of competency, and then also beyond that, whether that competency is having an impact on business metrics.
Yeah, and just to sort of piggyback on what Andrew said, this behavioral observations are a really fantastic way for observers to code observations and feed it, maybe by filling out a survey or whatnot, and extracting that data using xAPI. Another sort of method, 360-degree feedback. You have employees working around you all the time who are observing you and your behavior and your competency, your interactions with other people, who can testify to, based on rubrics, testify to your ability, I'd say, for some anecdotal data that could mean something. Don't want to say it's a definitive, but observed behavior could mean something.
It's data.
Yeah.
And Kristin, you're hinting at something that I've thought for a long time, which is it's about assertions, right? And it's about the people around you understanding their level of competence, the ones that can evaluate you, and how capable they are of evaluating you. So really, it needs to end up being kind of a matrix of numbers of based on the types of assertions you can make, how valuable you are at making those assertions, and when you do make them. If your average person doesn't know how to evaluate you and they're making evaluations, then that's not as valuable as someone who would be good at it. So I think there needs to be some really interesting mathematical models that really evaluate social scores within certain domains. And I guess that's as simple as I can put it.
Well, and I think, right, so what we've got here, right, there's things that, there's work and learning that happens in front of a screen with input devices where I can be capturing that data, right? There's then work that happens in the wet world, right, in the human interactions, like cooking spaghetti, right, in which I can observe you, right? Or I think one of my favorite xAPI or xAPI Med examples was, like intubating a cat at a veterinary clinic, right? So you take all your courses and then a message gets sent to somebody who can evaluate whether you can actually intubate a cat. Having given cats pills before, I want nothing to do with intubating a cat. But anyways, right? But somebody is evaluating that, right? That it's that feedback, right? And then the others is also the Internet of Things, right? Sensors and devices and other things where that work happens, right? How are you braking on the truck, right? Not braking the truck, but like, do you have a hard brake score, right, or whatever? And so those kinds of things are really, really interesting. So great question, Frank. Thank you very much. All right, we've talked about a number of things today, right? We talked about the adoption of the spec, lots of examples of people doing this. Let's turn this for the last, whoops, I wanted that question could come back. Let's turn this on ourselves, right? So what do we see as opportunities for those of us working in this space, right? Working in xAPI, working in CMI5, what qualifications, what do we need to get involved? And I'll even preface that with what's been really cool is watching this community evolve and watching people get jobs and get skilled up and then get jobs through their work that they're doing in the xAPI cohort, which is super cool. I've actually hired 2 people out of the xAPI cohort. And then they've gotten hired, right? And so and other people are getting other jobs. I mean, jobs are being posted there. So, and there was a whole conference a couple of years ago, right, on basically the skills associated with what is a learning engineer. So what kind of skills does the industry need? What kinds of skills does an individual need? And what kinds of opportunities are out there? So thanks, Martin, for your question. All right, let me make it simple. Do we all have to go out and become data scientists or JavaScript programmers?
Okay, so I was going to wait for everybody because I feel like I've been a little dominant here, but so definitely the things that we just talked about, data science and data viz. There's a lot of opportunity there. But in my session earlier, when we were talking about xAPI profiles and the expertise that was brought to the team to create the xAPI profile that we created, we benefited from people who are experts in language, like having an English or linguistics background, people who are experts in UX, people who just kind of have the general xAPI knowledge and background. So that's good. But what else? There were other things. And instructional design. Instructional design, of course, is a great background to have to understand what learners need and what data instructional designers in their organizations need. So there are a lot of like softer skills in addition to the engineering and the data science and data viz. Not software. I don't know why I said that, but like more humanities related, I guess, more people focused rather than code focused, I guess.
I'm not sure about qualifications and things, but we've identified sort of 5 roles that you need if you're forming a team to do learning analytics, with xAPI data. So you need someone technical who can do the sort of the integrations, maybe a data engineer type person. I'm going to forget one of these roles now, but I think it is 5. So you need someone technical. You need a visionary leader, someone who maybe doesn't necessarily understand the details, but they've they can work with a business. They can identify what is actually the value to the business in this. We're not just doing something cool with xAPI because we're not going to get budget for that. What difference are we making? How is this going to actually, how are we going to get budget? What's the business plan? You need somebody to do the analytics. So actually to play with the data once you've got all that data in and do all of the reporting. I'm on 3. I've got 2 more left. I think a project manager is always useful in anything, just to tie it all together. And there is definitely a 4th one that is escaping me right now. But
Hype man. Matt Cleaver says it's hype man. You need one.
A hype man, yeah. Well, that's really the visionary leader, I think. The really sort of hype it up. And maybe that's all one person, but maybe an instructional designer. Yes, to train people and that'd be good. But it could, those roles can all be, there can be overlap. It doesn't necessarily have to be 5 different people. It might be people that are partly doing other jobs, but they're the kind of 5 buckets of things, or 4 that I could remember.
I think there's a lot of room for people who want to solve problems creatively. I mean, if we can continue to express any sort of human thought or human action with data, we're now expanding what we can capture in data. So we can really start to answer interesting problems. So I think that in areas where we maybe used to not be able to quantify certain things, now we're able to do that. So people who have drive and creativity want to solve these problems are going to be able to do it.
I particularly think that's true when you are looking at people who can think about how to use data, like Andrew was saying, xAPI is one kind of data. Use data to answer your questions without necessarily doing the data science part, because I think that is going to be a limitation on the L&D side for a while. So it might be a matter of using smaller data points, different indicators than, just do we have to, program in R and, put these things through a lot of complex computations to spit out wisdom.
Kristin, who are some of the people on your teams as you all look, even if you're not looking at xAPI per se in some of your solutions, what's some of the teams that come to the people that come to the table?
Oh, that's a great question. So some of our core team for the learning experience design team is comprised of narrative designers, instructional designers, and UI UX designers. And we sort of all work cohesively to create learning solutions. And in terms of learning analytics, each of us have different research questions that we want to investigate with these analytics that we're collecting, right? From me as a learning designer, things that are really important for me are indicators of learning efficacy and behavior change, whereas my UI UX researcher peers may have more research questions to investigate based on learners' navigation through the various systems that we have. And so I think it's having this sort of cross-functional team and being able to create all of these different research questions that we can then investigate once we have all of this data collected, as well as a back-end team who may be implementing a lot of these xAPI statements in Unity and collecting it and storing it elsewhere, but being able to retrieve that data and use it in a way that each of us could effectively use it for our own purposes and continuously iterating on all of our solutions. So that's sort of our process and the different people and capabilities really that are involved.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. And thank you all, everyone. This is, I think we've answered all the questions that we got in the Q&A and a couple from the chat. I want to thank our set of panelists. And I want to thank everybody who joined us today and everybody who will watch this, because the conversation doesn't end here. In fact, that's what I found when I first started getting involved with xAPI. This is actually where the conversation starts, right? So this is where connections get made. This is where project ideas get formed. Before the excitement leaves you and you shut down for Friday night, go ahead and sign up for next spring's cohort. It is free. If all you do is sign up so you get the reminders to show up and to see who might be speaking, or the copies of the recordings of the sessions, you'll want to do that. And when you do join the cohort, you also get access to the Slack channel, which is a community of almost 4,000 people now who are using xAPI, who helped create xAPI, who are curious about xAPI, who are skeptical of xAPI, and an opportunity to learn and share in there, and all sorts of good stuff. So thank you, everyone. I also want to give a huge thank you to Jamie Washington, Liz Barron from the TorranceLearning team, who were our producers for today. And they helped make this move with almost there were no visible glitches anywhere. Like, this worked. And this can only happen because you have somebody behind the scenes who are making all this happen. So thank you, both of you. And Matt Cleaver, who's constantly feeding me with the links about the things that I'm talking about, which is pretty much my favorite way to speak. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining the party. Watch your email because those of you who are registered will get a link to all the recordings for this. And we hope to see you out there in the world making cool stuff and joining us in the cohort. So thanks, everybody. We're going to leave this room open. So if you want, once the screens and the pictures leave, you can all go out to the networking table and hang out for a few minutes there, make connections, go find people, and have yourselves a good time. So thanks, everybody. And thanks, Andy, Judy, Kristin, Andrew. It's Friday night now, except for you, for Judy. Well, and actually,